Hi, I've been playing guitar and teaching now for a few years, and I think the number one most important thing that all guitarists need to have is a really good working knowledge of their scales and how they work right across the fretboard. The traditional way of teaching scales is by learning box shapes that transition across the guitar neck from E to E. Take for example our minor pentatonic scale, in this case in the key of G. The main disadvantage I see with these box shapes is that I have a lot of students that sit down and start with good intentions, wanting to learn these scales all the way over their necks so they can improvise really well and play lots of solos. But the main blockage I feel is that it's too complicated for people to get their heads around. It takes too long for people to absorb these scales and to be able to see them and see how they interact with each other. The second disadvantage I see with this box shape idea is that it doesn't really give you an idea how these shapes fit into musical concepts or musical theory, which makes it hard for the guitarist to get his head around how musical theory interacts with the guitar and interacts with these scales. After years of having students totally frustrated with trying to learn these scales, I thought there's got to be a better way to teach people these scales, because after all it's only really a 7-note pattern and it should be very, very simple. Like, it's very easy for a piano player to learn these scales because it's just one line of notes. But as we all know as guitarists, we've got not one line, but we've got 6 lines of notes we've got to try and negotiate around. So I sat down and tried to think of a way to communicate these scale concepts in a simple but still a learnable way, where people can pick up on these ideas and learn them and know the scales inside out from beginning to end on the neck. Okay, here we go. So with this approach, I've designed 7 steps, and once the 7 steps are completed, you should hopefully know, if you've spent adequate enough time with this thing and investigated it and followed the steps carefully, you should be able to know all of the notes in the G major scale from the beginning of the nut right up to your very most highest fret. And you might ask, why just the G major scale? Don't we need to do all the scales? Well, yes, we do need to do all the scales. But like you'll understand from everything else we learn in guitar, most of the things we learn is about shapes and positions. And just like with the C major scale, if we start on the C major scale and spell out the correct tone, tone, semitone pattern, we'll obtain the C major scale. Now, if we apply the same pattern to a different starting note, we get a different major scale, in this case the G major scale. So what really we have to do is pay careful attention to how the intervals or how the degrees of the scales relate to each other in the key of G major. And once we can see that really clearly, it shouldn't be any problem at all to transpose into another key, whether it be A, B flat, F, or whatever it is. It's the main thing you want to learn through this, is to see the relationship between the notes of the scale and how they fit in geographically to one another. Okay, step number 1 is the most important step in the whole process. Without having a good locked-in, memorize this concept, you'll struggle throughout the rest of the steps. So make sure you spend time to really lock this in before you move on to the next step, step number 2. So step number 1, we're looking at our octaves over the key of G. So we're starting on the 3rd fret on the E string, which is of course a G note. And then we'll also find another G on our G string, open, obviously, and then another G on the high E string on the 3rd fret. So if we look at that, we've got G, G, and G. If you look at the notes, you'll see there'll be some notation and some tab for you to have a look at. And what we want to do is play this exercise through, so we memorize the different positions of where these G notes are and how, like I said, once again, how they relate to one another. Remember, the key to this exercise is to see how these notes relate to one another. And what I mean by that is, if we look at the G note on our E string, and then the next octave up from that, we'll notice is 2 frets up, and it's got a string in between it. So we get 2 frets up, 2 strings down, and that gives us our octave, first octave of our G. If we also notice the relation between these two notes on the E strings, obviously they're both E strings, so when we fret the note out at the 3rd position on both these strings, we're both going to have a G note. So remember that. So if you've got a B up here on the guitar on the 7th fret, you will also have a B here on the 7th fret on the high E string. So take your time, like I said, take your time to go through this, the little exercise on the sheet, on the notation tab sheet, and take your time to memorize the different positions of these G notes. Because like I said, it's the foundation to everything else. Have fun.